Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to Kottabos Space Program, where today we are having a look at yet another wonderful mod, this time in the form of the Kramax Autopilot, which is being made by forum user Kramer. And what this glorious little piece of work looks to add into the game is an interesting autopilot system, specifically for space planes. Which you may be wondering, well, why do we need another autopilot system when we already have the king of autopilots in the form of MacJeb? And, well, quite frankly, I was wondering the same thing when I first saw this on the mod forums not too long ago, as I absolutely love MacJeb due to the fact that I am a horrible, horrible pilot. But the problem for me with MacJeb is that even though it is great, it does take pretty much full control away from you and flies the ship with more or less zero input from yourself. You just click a button and it goes, which can be a problem if, like me, you are trying to become a better pilot. And so in comes the Kramax Autopilot, which can take complete control away from you for a flight, but also has the ability to merely assist you in a flight, which is great if you actually still want to have some form of manual input, and that's just wonderful. So let's jump right on into the runway to take a look at how it all works. And I should mention right off the bat here that this mod is actually, oh god, what's the best way to put it? Built upon another mod, which was the Pilot Assistant mod by Crazy Random. Now, that mod was created some time ago and actually is still an active mod, but that Pilot Assistant was just that, purely a pilot assistant. It didn't have any autopilot portion, and so Kramer built upon the pilot assistant mod, changing how it assists you, and then also adding in an autopilot, which can now be found in this glorious little button here with the black airplane. And boom, you just click that, and we have this glorious UI here, which is kind of split into two sections, really. This top half is essentially the remnants of the Pilot Assistant mod. Each of these individual things allows you to control individual sort of properties of your airplane. So whether it be horizontal roll control, vertical pitch, or throttling, etc., you can use these to adjust individual unique aspects of your flight. Down here, though, is the autopilot, which allows you to just hand over, more or less, complete control to the computer. So you can have as much control up here or as little control down here as you desire, and that's why I've really fallen in love with this mod overall. So let's take a look at the individual pieces. Now, these buttons up here, at the very, very top, I'm not gonna talk about because I'll be honest, I don't understand the vast majority of them. These buttons are what you use if you really know what the crap you're doing and you want to make it as complicated as possible. As essentially, I'll just quickly, briefly take a look at these. These PID numbers, I forget what PID stands for, but it's essentially the numbers used by the computer to figure out what it needs to do next. And when you show the limits of them or the min-max limits, it can become more complicated because these, when I turn these buttons on and off, if we then hit the heading, we get all of these little individual minute things, which basically control how sensitive the actual control is, how quickly it does things, and that, you know, sort of what ferocity, I guess, of how forceful it is with those changes, and I don't understand any of it. So we're gonna just turn all of that off and pay attention to the bare bones of the Kramax Autopilot. If you want to dig into those, be my guest, and good luck and Godspeed. You're gonna need it. But the first real control is the roll control here, which is basically the horizontal movement of your airplane. Now we can turn that on. As you'll notice right now, the button is red. We can turn it on by clicking it, and now it's blue and active. And from here, we can control the banking of the plane, so how much we're essentially having our wings tilted one way or the other, and you control that by either changing the number in here manually by your keys, or using the plus and minus arrows to either add banking, which should actually bank the plane that direction, or to the negative direction, which should bank the plane in that direction. And once you change one of these numbers, you hit the target bank button, and that will cause the plane to go in that banking. Now we can also hit this level button, which will level the wings out to where it is now, pretty much flat on 0, and yeah, that'll bring you basically to a, I guess, nulled state. Now the next one is our heading. Now the heading is what direction our nose is pointing on the compass on the nav ball here. Now we're of course facing at 90, you can see it there. You can also see it here, which we're actually just ever so slightly off from 90. And just like the banking, we can control it by the plus or minus buttons or type in here manually. And then you hit the target heading button and it will start to turn the plane in that direction. And you'll also notice this little screen here, that is how far off from that target heading you are. So we're at 90, it wants to be at 75 now, so we need to go in a negative 15 direction. So we need to go that away, over here, to actually get to that point. So that's quite nice and handy that it'll show you that. And then the last one is the follow flight plan course. This button, when you click it, hands over control of the roll to the flight plan autopilot down here, which we'll talk about more momentarily. Now we can turn off the roll and head down to vertical movement, and when this is active, we can change the pitch of the plane, just like the banking or heading, using the plus or minus, or type in whatever you need in here. The vertical speed, which of course is how fast the plane is going up or going down, which we can adjust once again, like with everything else, with the plus or minus, or type it in. Then we have the altitude, which we're currently at 70.59 meters above sea level there. And this will get it to the altitude that you tell it to go to. So if we click that and make it 100, it would try to get up to 100. Now the radar altitude is the same, but it goes off of the radar altitude instead. So right now we're 1.35 meters above ground level, so we would change that to whatever that needs to be. And the last button is the glide scope, which again hands over vertical control to the flight plan autopilot. Essentially, in each of these three things that we have here, the last button hands over speed control to this. So that is a good thing to remember. Now we can turn that off and go to auto throttle. And the auto throttle, well, controls the throttle. This one is the just standard velocity, and that will be our surface speed, and we just change that up or down and hit the target speed, like with everything else. We can change our rate of acceleration, so how fast we are going up or down in speed, and again, change that normally. And finally, the land one, which changes over the velocity controls to the autopilot, and specifically these approach speeds down here, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Now, that brings us to the glorious autopilot, and this is my favorite thing about this whole mod, because it's a more realistic autopilot than, say, MechJeb. MechJeb, you click a target somewhere out there, like, say, hit the button that says Gili, and it will freaking fly to Gili. This, it doesn't work like that. You actually have to create flight plans, just like you would in the real world. You say, I'm going from here to here to here to here, etc., and that flight plan gets loaded into here by a config file in the mod folder. And I love that, because even though it is still an autopilot, it adds that bit of difficulty to it, because you actually have to plan your flights manually. You have to figure out, okay, I want this point to be at this lat long position, this altitude, etc., and create your flight plan that way. And then once you have it in the config file, which I'll show a brief screenshot of now, boom, then you bring it into the game by this load and store button here, which if we click, brings us into this right here. Now we can refresh the config file, which you can actually see on the screen right now. That's the path of the flight plans config file, which has all of the flight plans in it. And then down here, we see a list of all of the flight plans that we have available to us. And you can see they do have little tooltip descriptions on each of them, which is quite handy. Like this one is an auto land sequence. So if you're bringing back a space plane from orbit, once you're back in the atmosphere, you can click this and it will line the plane up with the runway and land the plane. This takes off the plane. This does a big circle around the Kerbal Space Center. This does a small circle around the Kerbal Space Center. This will take you to the island base over there. And I forget what this one does. I actually don't think I've flown this one yet. But let's take a look at this one here, which is the Depart Kerbal Space Center. This is a very basic 2-waypoint flight plan, which takes the plane off and puts it in a heading of 90 degrees. So what this does, now that we've loaded it up, we can see what it is actually doing. Now we're on the active first waypoint here. So that's depart this location by going 2.4 kilometers down that way and try and get up within that 2.4 kilometers up to 500 meters in altitude, going on a heading of 90 degrees. Once it finishes that, it will move down to this waypoint, which is the KSC downrange, and it will try and fly us up to 50,000 meters at a heading of 90 degrees within 1,000 kilometers. So this is a very basic flight plan, which will basically take us off from the runway. So what we're going to do is we're going to have control over the throttle, but I'm going to hand over control to the plane, to the computer. So we're going to give it roll control and vertical control. And pay attention to these down here. We'll talk more about these momentarily. Now, I need a throttle. Yes, there we go. I suddenly blanked for a moment what I needed to do. Let's first stage the plane, turn off the brakes, and I'm going to control the throttle. As I said, we're going to have the auto throttle off, and I'm just going to get us up to max speed. And I'm going to be controlling this, so this is the only buttons I'm going to be doing. Everything else is being handled by the autopilot. So let's sort of put it at an angle there. And so there we go. It is pitching up itself. And once we start to pass 150 meters, the landing gear should automatically retract. Oh, there they go. Perfect. And we are 0.5 kilometers away from the end of the runway, which, there we go. It's now gone to the second waypoint, so it is going to try and get us up to 50,000 meters within this distance. So you can see this ticking down. That is what it's trying to get to at this point, 995.5 kilometers away. And within that time span, it's going to try and get us up to that altitude. I don't think this plane will make it. Well, it might. I mean, that is 1,000 kilometers of distance to actually handle. But there we go. We are taken off from the runway via the autopilot. And are you noticing these down here, how they're changing slightly? These are important. These are additional fun tools that you have at your... Oh, God, what's the word? At your command, I guess is the best. Oh my god, I'm forgetting words again. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, at your command. I thought I remembered the word there for a moment. Sorry, folks. That show your direction to the next waypoint. So this is trying to get to this altitude at this heading at that distance away. And that little diamond there is showing you basically the ideal angle and approach that you want to be at to get to that point. As it is 1,000 kilometers away, so we don't have to be angled that much to get up to our preferred altitude. And so those diamonds are additional little control features that can help you fly if you turn off the autopilot. Because, for instance, we can turn off the vertical control and the roll control, and we'll have control back to ourselves. We're now manually flying the plane. And you see that we're still heading on the right direction, though we're starting to lose it a little bit. Oh god, we're losing it more. Oh god. And we're way off on angle-wise, and so this can help you fly by telling you how to get to that right point that you need to be at. So we should be angling down, I believe, for that right now, because we're going to have to go back down, then actually angle back up, because we should get it to a point in altitude where that'll go up to there, because we need to be at that ideal angle for it to get to that 50,000 kilometers within 950 kilometers in distance. So yes, that is a helpful bit of control. So right now we're about, oh god, we're getting closer. So about 50 meters off from where we need to be horizontally, and about 1,000 meters off from where we need to be vertically. And so you can use these to help you learn how to pilot, which you're obviously seeing I'm awful at this. So let's turn those back on. And yes, it's showing that it needs to go down, then back up, and it's readjusting the numbers from last time we had it active. So they're quite cool tools, and these only show when you have these two buttons selected. So if we turn off the glide slope and go back to like pitch, that goes away. And if we go back from the nav to banking, that one goes away. So it's quite nice to have these on here, and it's cool that when you turn them off, they're still technically functional for you to sort of try and fly and keep it at pace with that, which obviously I can't while also talking. Now, the throttling, the auto throttle. This is a fun one. We need to load a different flight plan. Let's do the small circuit. And now, we're on another flight plan again here. And so the plane is trying to turn around because since we started the new flight plan, it's wanting to get back to the end of the Kerbal Space Center runway. So it is slowly but surely turning around to get to that point, but I don't want it to go there. I'd much rather it go to, say, this WP North point. So what we can do is you can actually skip to the next waypoint or any waypoint in line by clicking this button here. So if I wanted to go to the WP North, there we go. You see that changed all the way the crap over there. So it needs to turn around quite quickly, which it's wanting to go quite slowly on the turn right now, but it is turning. That's one of the things about this autopilot. It likes to do quite wide turns. But yes, it will eventually make it to this point, and then it will continue the flight plan from here. So it'll then go to the Bonzo point, then to the IAF point, etc. And these points here are where the auto throttle comes into play. Now, when you're flying, it normally will just be whatever max throttle you control it to. Even if you're on the auto throttle there, we can change it to that. But how it knows how to slow the plane down for a landing, because this thing can land itself if you let it, it needs these numbers here. Because basically, the vast majority of the time you're flying, you're just going to be controlling the throttle yourself, but when you have the landing one turned on, it will automatically change the throttle when you reach these points. So when you reach this waypoint, the IAF, which, oh god, I'm suddenly forgetting what that stands for. Initial approach fix, I believe, is what it stands for. You'd think I'd know these things, considering my brother actually is a real-world pilot, but I forget them all the time. But yeah, I believe it's initial approach fix, which is as you're coming into the runway to land. So you're getting to the right angle to land, and what it'll do is if we have the approach speeds turned on, once it reaches that initial approach fix, it will automatically throttle down to 200 meters per second. Now, once we reach the FAF, which is the final approach fix, it'll throttle down to 175. Once it's on the final approach, nicely lined up with the runway and beginning its descent into landing, it'll throttle down to 100. And then, automatically, just the default in the autopilot program, when it's on the RW, which is the runway, it will throttle all the way down to a stop. So this is how it automatically controls speeds, and you can adjust these just like you can any other thing. So if you want to come in much more slowly on your final approach, you can tell it to do so. And that's how you change those speeds. Other than that, Any other waypoint that you're going to on here, you'll notice it has nothing in these columns because it doesn't know what the ideal speed should be when flying around, just what the ideal speed should be when trying to take off or land. Which we're actually going to do real quick, because we're going to revert back to the space plane, or to the launch, because I do want you to see it landing. So we're going to do that flight plan again, but I'm going to fast forward it until we land. So let's do the takeoff one first. Let's throttle up. And from here on out, I'm going to fast forward until we're just about to reach the initial approach fix point. So I will bring you folks back then. See you in a sec. Okay, and bringing you back, because, well, we are at the IAF point and have been for a little bit, so we've already throttled down to 200 meters per second automatically by the autopilot. And I'm just waiting for us to close in on this distance because it basically gets into the right heading. And then, oh, there we go. We made it to that point, so we are now turning to the FAF position, which means we are now throttling down to 175 meters per second, and I have not touched the keyboard in quite some time. In fact, during the fast forwarding, I actually left my desk to go get a drink momentarily, and it was good. Good drink, good drink. Got myself a nice Pilsner. Nice. But yes, there we go. This is the autopilot and its automatic throttling system, and I love it. So you can't really tell it to control the speed at other points. It just automatically assumes with all these other navigation points to just be at max speed, unless you tell it otherwise via the velocity in here. And same thing with the vertical and roll, it's just going to assume the direction and heading and everything that it needs to go unless you tell it to manually do something else. And that's quite frankly why I love this mod. You can just leave your desk like I did and let it fly on its own to line it up with the runway, but you can also turn off little bits and bobs so that you can control some of the flight. And even if you aren't flying with the autopilot, you can still use these things to assist your flight by setting a vertical pitch that you want it to keep, but then you control the banking and heading, or you want it to keep a certain speed, but you control the altitude that you're at, or whatever it is. You can mix and match this system to exactly what you want it to be, and how you want to fly, and how much or how little control you'd like to have. And, well, quite frankly, that to me is the ideal sort of system. And also, for those of you who like realism in the game, or more realism rather, this is kind of how it works in real life. I mean, you got instruments that control all these sorts of things, and of course, autopilots aren't just fly here. No, you've got to tell it fly this way, and then do that. It's all good. But yes, I'm gonna also suddenly turn us this way, because at about 500 meters, it should automatically deploy the landing. Yep, there it is. Alright, so it was a little bit more than 500, but close enough. There we go, we have that, and we're of course throttled down to 100, or getting down to 100, because we are on the final approach speed here, which again, you can adjust like everything else. And then once we reach the runway in roughly 1 kilometer, it'll start braking automatically to get us down to 0. And, well, that's just great. Oh boy, we are coming in, aren't we? And that is the smoothest landing I have ever had. And I'm not even controlling it. But there we go, we are on the ground, the brakes automatically came on, and we are getting down automatically to 0 meters per second, as per the default for the runway position. And yeah, there we go, that's this freaking autopilot system. I absolutely love it. And it's just a good time. Again, it can be as complicated or as simple as you'd like it to be. You can have it fly on its own, or just you controlling specific things and having it assist you in others. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And if you would like to try it for yourself, you can take a look at the link in the description, as always. And I definitely say to go give it a try. And if you guys come up with any really cool flight plans, I don't know, maybe you find out a way to do some really tight turning flight plans where you're like zigzagging between the islands or something, I'd love to see them. So share them with me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, etc., whatever social medias you use. But yeah, that is going to be it for today's episode. I hope you all have enjoyed, and of course that you do come back for the next episode. But until then, I thank you for watching, my friends, and as always, have a good one. Oh, brakes on. I was thinking, oh, I'll have some nice epic takeoff as I control the throttle from here, but then I forgot that the brake was still on. Okay, well, let's pitch it up 25 degrees. There we go. Autopilot. Later, folks.